Hello everyone, and thanks for joining today's Healing Arts class. I'm very, very excited to introduce you to watercolor pencils. And we will actually be exploring this medium over the next few classes. I think all of you have probably had some experience with colored pencils. So it'll be a very nice way to introduce you into turning a drawing into a painting. With a little bit of water and a little bit of magic, I think you will really enjoy this lesson. So follow me step by step. You can pause it at any time to review it. And I think all of you will have a very good experience. And I look forward to sharing some of these paintings with you. For materials today, you're going to need a piece of watercolor paper, a smaller piece of watercolor paper, which will be a little practice sheet, watercolor pencils. These watercolor pencils I think are very nice. They're super soft. The company is Caran d'Ache. It's a Swiss-made watercolor pencil, and absolutely use what you have, but if you get the chance to pick these up, I think you will be really pleased. They're very, very nice to work with. You will also need a size 12 watercolor brush, and this is considered a round brush. This manufacturer is Utrecht, but there are many on the market, and it is a synthetic brush. Eventually you will need a flat brush, and this is a 1/2 inch flat, no, 3/4 of an inch flat brush, and this is a 1/2 inch flat brush, also synthetic. An HB pencil. I think this is the best eraser to use on watercolor paper. Magic Rub Prismacolor. Masking tape, 2 cups of water, a couple of sheets of paper towels. You will need some kind of a board to attach your watercolor paper to. If you've got a traditional drawing board, you can attach it to that. But if you don't, a simple piece of cardboard will work, as long as it's a nice flat surface. Or maybe you have an old piece of foam board around, and you could use that as well. And last, I would recommend a little desk light so that you can position this over the objects that you're painting and create a nice shadow, light and shadow situation. And that's it for supplies. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Healing Arts class. And today, since we have spring just around the corner, actually tomorrow, I thought we would start painting some flowers. So I have for the subject matter today a tulip. I don't know if you guys can see it. I know you're looking straight down on that. I'm going to move it to a little bit in front of me so I can get a better view. So I would just suggest any container that you can find to put your tulip in. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm using a glass jar. You can use anything that you have in your home, anything you're comfortable with. And just the tulips are everywhere right now, so just pick one up. And if you can even find imitation silk tulips at Michael's, and they're pretty reasonably priced. So I'm just going to go over the steps from the first class that we had regarding watercolor pencils and how to use them. I always like to start off just by practicing. So we're going to practice with the pencils just to refresh our memories about how you get a richer, deeper color based on how much of the pencil you actually put down. So I have a little piece of watercolor paper that I'm going to use as a practice sheet, and I think that's always a good idea to have, so that if you want to see what a color is going to look like, if you want to get a feel for how dark or light a shade is going to be, you can always practice on your practice sheet before you actually paint on your painting. So I want you to remember that the lighter, the darker that you color in your square, the darker the shade will be. Just going to go over again to the supplies, the watercolor pencils. I've got those on my left, and on my right I have a brush, a round brush. 2 cups of water, and very important, a paper towel, because you're going to be using that a lot. So you want to get your brush wet. And again, just to remind you, the reason why we have 2 cups of water is that the first cup we will use to clean our brush in between colors, because we want to keep our brush fresh every time. And then the second is for some clean water, when we need to use clean water to make adjustments. So you want to get your brush wet, and then make sure you use the edge of the cup. You don't want it dripping wet. If it's really wet, it's just going to run everywhere. So you want to get some of that excess water off. And here's where the magic happens. Here's where your colored pencil turns into watercolor. So I'm cleaning off the brush in between these little squares, because I don't want the pigment that's on this to affect the shade of this. Even though I am just working with green, I want to have a clear picture of how much pencil I have to put down to get the value I'm looking at. When I say value, I mean from light to dark. Okay. So you can practice with all of the shades that we're using today. I have a violet, sort of a pinkish violet tulip. So I'll be using from the pencil set purple and violet, yellow, green, and brown. So let's get started. I'm going to put this to the side. I have a 9 by 12 sheet of watercolor paper. Make sure that when you pick up your paper, you're going to notice that one side is a little bit rougher than the other side. Make sure the rough side is the side that's facing up. Again, we're going to tape this in place. As you recall, as the paper gets wet, it will buckle, and as it dries, it will flatten out again. But you need to tape it down to remind it to get back into its former shape. And I'm just taping the edge. Also can create a really nice frame around the entire painting. When you pull it off, you've got a nice clean white border. Okay, so the other thing that you're going to need is a pencil HB pencil's fine. And I'm going to start off with just a very, very light sketch. Pressure's on. Okay. So I'm just going to start with my tulip shape. And the tulip is very, you know, if you look at it, it's kind of a rectangle shape. And it has a long stem. The stem kind of curves. You're going to notice, you see how I'm using my arm to draw that? And unfortunately, I bought this a few days ago, and I forget how quickly these tulips can start to dry up, at least along the edges. I'm not sure I'm going to put the container in, but I'm just going to suggest it, and it's just kind of there, just the bottom of the page. I'm really just want to focus on painting this flower. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is I'm going to start off with the actual blossom. And I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can pull this. I have a light, a little desk light, and I have it pointed right at the bloom. So I have a light side and a dark side. It's very helpful when you're painting something to have a strong light so we can create nice, clean, sharp shadows. So I'm going to start by, and because the tulip has a light side and a dark side, one side of it appears to be more violet, more blue, and the side that's getting the light is a little bit pinker. But what I'm going to do for right now, because the tulip is pink all over, I'm going to just fill this whole square in with this light shade. And remember what I said, where you see it darker, and everyone's going to have a slightly different situation. So remember, it's not about a perfect painting. Everyone will have a different light source, a different flower, you'll have different shapes, but just as long as you understand the concepts. So where I see that the shadow is darker, I'm actually going to add more pencil to that area. Sometimes it's just a line that separates one petal from the other. Okay. This side is definitely darker. Now I'm going to take the violet, and just on this side, I'm going to add a little bit of this blue. Actually, this is the violet. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave that. The next thing I'm going to do is I can see at the bottom of this tulip there is a stem, and I see yellow in the stem, and part of that is this light that's hitting it. So I am just going to start with the yellow, and then I'm looking at the leaves, and I'm thinking, okay, where I see something that's lighter and brighter, and I can see that there's definitely some yellow, I'm going to add the yellow. And you're going to find it's pretty much spread out everywhere, a little bit here, a little bit there. But there's also green. So by adding this yellow, I am just going to be affecting the green that I'm putting on next. Now I can see that there is some green in this stem, and I also am aware that on the left side of the stem is a light source. So the right side of that stem, because the stem is a round object, has a shadow side. Overall, I'm going to be filling in with the light green, and I'm even going to be going on top of that yellow. Just filling in these leaves. It's okay if the pencil goes in different directions. It doesn't matter, because once we hit it with water, it will turn into paint. The important part is that right now we're establishing the middle tone, middle value, and I pretty much covered up all of that yellow, so what will happen is the yellow and the green will mix together. Now I want you to look carefully and see where you have some real sharp, dark shadows. I don't have a lot. I only have it in a few places where the stem meets the jar and these large leaves. There's a little bit of a shadow in here. The inside of this is all in shadow. And it's okay to have some nice crisp line. Remember, it's just like you're drawing. I'm just going to make that tip a little bit darker, and this, where it kind of got a little bit dried up at the end, but it's sort of making an interesting shape, so I'm going to go with it. Okay, so I'm just looking again to see where else I can make a few adjustments. I'm just going to suggest this vase. And just kind of let it just disappear. It's suggested, but it's not going to be the main focus. Now I'm looking at the blossom again, and I'm thinking, you know, it's really, really super bright here. So I'm going to make this a little bit, remember, the more pigment I put down, the richer the color is going to be. So I'm going to make this bloom, this little petal in the front, a brighter color. And I think I'm going to get started. Okay, so I'm going to clean my brush just to make sure. Take off the excess water and blot. I'm going to blot on my paper towel. Actually, that's a little bit too much. Go in and get some clean water. Now I know it's not, hasn't been contaminated. And again, you don't want it dripping wet. Take off the extra excess water, and the magic happens. Now this is where I'm going to be blotting, because sometimes you'll get a puddle of water, and maybe you don't want the paint to dry in that position. So you can remove some of the water by blotting, by using the paper towel, which will become your friend. The more you learn about how to use watercolor, you're going to realize what an important asset it is. Isn't that fantastic? You know, these are the best watercolor pencils I've ever used. You want to get a good quality watercolor brand, because the cheaper ones have too many fillers in them, and they rip up the paper, and you just don't get the same quality that a good quality watercolor pencil will give you. And that list of materials will be at the beginning of the video. All right, so I've cleaned off my brush. I'm going to blow on this a little bit. You can also use a hairdryer. It should dry pretty fast because it's dry in here today. But what I don't want to happen, I don't want this yellow to bleed into this violet. So, but safely, I think I have enough of a space where they will not touch. But you can also take a break, let this dry, come back, and continue working. Sometimes it's fun to have watercolor bleed together, and we'll actually have an exercise where we let that happen on purpose. But for today's lesson, we want to keep them apart. And you can see how nicely the yellow bleeds in with the green and gives you that yellow green. You can see I'm just using the tip of the brush. the less water you have on your brush, the more control. And I can feel it's getting a little dry, so now I'm going to have to get some more water. I'm just going to rinse, blot, get some fresh water, and make sure again it's not too wet. And I'm just going to let that fade off. Just a few little marks here to suggest that it's in a vase. Whoops, I did that wrong cup. It's fine though. Okay, again, we're going to let this dry, and you are going to walk away or use a blow dryer. And for some of you who want to go back in with the pencil, you can do that at this stage. I'm using the brown pencil. And again, you should wait for the video's sake. I'm moving ahead, but in a few areas, I'm going to add a little bit more shadow into the stem and these the leaves to tone down that green a little bit. You could also use blue, I suppose. And there's nothing wrong with having a nice crisp line in a few spots. To make that form pop a little bit more. Just suggesting the front of the milk vase. There's a little tiny, you know, these little petals are like crepe, right? There's just these tiny little soft edges that meet one another and create a line, an interesting line. And if you want to give it a little bit more form, come back in. And it really is so much better when this is completely dry before you go back. You just get a better result. just going to touch it ever so slightly, let it bleed. There's some back petals here, but they're not as important as the front ones. There's just a lovely shadow on this side. The other thing too that you will learn the more you do this, the more you touch it, you can actually remove product as well as depositing it. With a clean brush, if you make a mistake, you can just come back and actually pick it up and then deposit it onto your paper towel, which is why it's one of your best friends. There's a little bit of yellow underneath. Amazing how just sometimes one small thing can affect the whole painting. Come back in with a little more green here. And I'm actually going to lighten the inside of this because I can see it wasn't quite working the way I wanted it to. So never fear. If you make a mistake, this is not as unforgiving as some people would make you believe it is. A little bit of light blue in this old-fashioned vintage milk bottle, and just so the painting doesn't seem too empty down here, I'm just going to suggest some light blue. you know, the more you start looking, and the more you look, the more you do see. And the more I look at this, I could just keep maybe tweaking this more and more and more. But I think I am going to quit at this point. I don't want to overwhelm some of you who are watching this. You will, as you grow and as you start looking more and more carefully at objects, you will start to see the things that you missed the first time, which is all part of the process. It's all perfectly normal, and it's a great way to grow as artists. And I think I'm going to stop at this point, and thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can stop this video at any time and rewind and look at what I just did and then copy it yourself. So there's no way, you don't have to rush. You can take your time. You can do this more than once, which is also a great thing. I think it's fantastic to work on a couple of pieces at the same time. And you'd be surprised when you're working on more than one, you'll have one that actually will come together just the way you want it. Okay, thanks a lot, and I will see you